So think about this. If they got all this information on him dating a minor, an underage kid, and she look like a white girl, mixed girl, what they let just stay? Yeah.
What you think about that?
He didn't do it.
Fuck out of here. All the evidence that's out.
Just like that, Charleston White dropped a bombshell, declaring David innocent and backing it up with shocking proof nobody ever expected. The evidence he revealed flipped the case completely upside down and had the whole world questioning what they thought they knew before. When the story first broke that a dismembered body was found inside a Tesla registered to rising music star David, the internet exploded like gasoline on fire. Accusations, wild theories, and outrage spread like wildfire everywhere. Headlines rushed to paint him guilty before a trial was even in sight, while fans argued endlessly if his dark lyrics were really secret confessions hiding in plain view. Big brands panicked and cut ties instantly, desperate to save their own clean image. But right in the middle of the chaos, one voice cut through the noise louder than everybody else. Charleston White, brash, controversial, and unfiltered, came forward and said what nobody else dared to say publicly. He didn't hesitate, he didn't stutter, and he didn't flinch. He flat out declared David wasn't guilty at all. And he wasn't just talking reckless, he doubled down heavy on it. Charleston stunned the crowd by saying the lack of an arrest was the clearest, most undeniable proof of David's innocence. He pointed out that in America, especially for young black men, people get locked up every single day on way less evidence than this. They'll throw you in jail just to hold you, Charleston argued boldly. If cops had anything solid on David, he swore, the star would already be behind bars right now. To Charleston, the absence of charges wasn't proof investigators were quietly building some massive secret case. It meant they didn't really have a case at all, period. He made his point with one of his raw, streetwise analogies, the kind that cuts deep, makes people uncomfortable, but forces everybody listening to think harder. And that's where Charleston's message landed hardest. He reminded everyone that if it was just an average person tied to a body like this, they'd already be sitting in a freezing cell tonight. The fact that David was still on tour, still free, still moving around in public like nothing happened, to Charleston, that screamed louder than any rumor or headline ever could. But Charleston didn't stop there, not even close. He went straight at the nastiest accusations flying around, claims that David was linked to an underage girl's tragic death in shocking detail. Social media was drowning in speculation. Matching tattoos, leaked photos, and even song lyrics fans swore were hidden confessions of guilt. It was all too much, too convenient, and way too fast. Charleston ripped that whole narrative apart, calling it a setup so flawless it almost felt manufactured on purpose. Charleston White made it crystal clear to anyone listening. The story just didn't add up, not even a little bit. Think about it carefully. A young black artist allegedly tied to a missing 15-year-old girl with supposed physical evidence connecting him directly to her brutal death. And yet no detainment, no charges, not even a temporary overnight hold in a cell. To Charleston, that silence from law enforcement wasn't carelessness or negligence. It was the biggest, boldest clue of all. Maybe David wasn't the villain the whole world was so quick and eager to paint him as. And in true Charleston fashion, he didn't hold back for 1 second from making his audience squirm uncomfortably. He forced people to stare directly at the reality of how the body was discovered. Dismembered, hidden, brutalized in a way that shook even hardened viewers. He argued passionately that the crime looked like something far more calculated, far more cold-blooded than what David was even capable of pulling off. He pushed viewers to ask the dangerous question nobody wanted to consider. What if this whole thing was a setup? What if someone else entirely was really responsible instead? They got all this evidence to point to say he did it. He done sliced the body up because the body was butchered, and still no arrest? Charleston shouted with fire in his voice. Those explosive words ripped through X, YouTube, and Instagram instantly, sparking a firestorm of outrage and debate. Half the internet blasted him for defending the indefensible, accusing him of protecting a man whose car contained a teenager's remains. But the other half? They admitted Charleston was the only one bold enough to say out loud what they had been secretly wondering for weeks. Maybe this whole story wasn't nearly as simple as the headlines wanted us to believe. Charleston didn't just drop a hot take and disappear like some online troll. He stuck with the case, hammering his point home again and again in front of massive audiences. To him, it wasn't just suspicious that David hadn't been arrested yet. It was downright impossible to swallow the story as it was being told to the public. Then he hit his audience with a jaw-dropping comparison that left people stunned: the O.J. Simpson trial. By invoking one of the most infamous cases in American history, Charleston wasn't just name-dropping to stir hype. He was highlighting what he saw as blatant hypocrisy in how the justice system chooses who to throw behind bars and who it protects. If police were quick to jail O.J. over circumstantial evidence alone, why hadn't they done the same with David, who supposedly had far stronger evidence stacked directly against him from the start? And Charleston didn't stop there or pull back an inch. He went even darker, spinning out unsettling scenarios where someone else entirely could have been behind the gruesome act. The more he spoke on live streams and interviews, the clearer it became to his followers. Charleston wasn't buying the official narrative at all, not one single bit. These weren't polished courtroom arguments packaged for TV lawyers. They were raw verbal bombs tossed into the public square, messy, blunt, and absolutely impossible to ignore. And that's exactly why Charleston's voice carried so far across every platform. He wasn't tied down by courtroom rules or careful legal talk designed to soften edges. He spoke the way regular people argue on the block: emotional, heated, direct, and completely unfiltered. In his eyes, the case against David just didn't make sense, no matter how many times he broke it down. Charleston even mocked the so-called evidence that fans had clung to online, the infamous matching tattoos. Photos of David and the 15-year-old victim supposedly sharing the same tattoo on their index fingers had gone viral worldwide, with people swearing it was undeniable proof of intimacy. But Charleston wasn't buying that narrative at all. To him, a tattoo was nothing more than meaningless ink, and the fact that something so flimsy was being twisted into national headlines only showed how desperate people were to paint David guilty without real solid proof. Then came the line that lit social media completely on fire, the exact moment Charleston turned his criticism toward the girl herself, words that many instantly found deeply offensive, but that revealed exactly where his mindset really was. He wasn't holding back at all, even if it meant making people furious and sparking chaos. That statement dropped like dynamite across timelines everywhere. Critics immediately accused him of victim blaming, of tearing down a teenager who could no longer defend herself, just to shield David's image. But Charleston's defenders pushed back harder than ever. They argued he wasn't excusing anything at all. He was flipping the script, forcing people to ask whether the story being told was too neat, too convenient, and way too one-sided. To Charleston, asking those uncomfortable questions was always better than blindly swallowing the official narrative. And once again, he leaned hard into the racial angle without hesitation. Over and over again, he reminded his audience, they don't let black men get away with these kinds of crimes, not in America. That line echoed everywhere from TikTok to podcasts. For Charleston, it was the ultimate logic bomb. If a young black man had really done something this horrific, he wouldn't still be walking free. The fact that David was still moving around uncharged meant something much deeper was at play behind the curtains. While the internet obsessed endlessly over tattoos, leaked photos, and cryptic lyrics, Charleston zoomed out to the bigger picture: race, power, and how the justice system operates when the cameras are rolling nonstop. By this stage, Charleston wasn't just poking holes in the case anymore. He was ripping it apart piece by piece and daring anyone bold enough to prove him wrong in public. His words carried the weight and sharpness of someone who had studied injustice his entire life. To Charleston, this wasn't simply about one rapper's scandal. It was about a system that had never been fair to black men suddenly acting suspiciously too fair in a case that seemed tailor-made for a quick conviction. It was a chilling paradox, one Charleston wasn't afraid to shout about repeatedly. A body discovered in a Tesla registered directly to David. Allegations of a hidden relationship with a minor. Lyrics that sounded far more like confessions than harmless songs. To most people watching, all of this screamed guilt instantly. But Charleston White looked at the very same facts and flipped them upside down. To him, they were proof of innocence instead. Because if David was truly guilty, Charleston argued fiercely, the system wouldn't even hesitate for 1 second to lock him up. It was a strange, almost twisted kind of defense that nobody saw coming. Charleston didn't deny the evidence existed at all. Instead, he claimed there was too much evidence, so much stacked up that the very weight of it made the lack of an arrest look suspicious and downright unbelievable. To him, that contradiction was impossible to ignore and demanded serious answers. Then he went further, daring to ask the questions no one else wanted to touch in public. What if this wasn't David's crime at all? What if it was a setup? A frame job that looked airtight on the surface but was actually full of cracks once you pulled it apart carefully. Those what-ifs turned Charleston's commentary into a viral firestorm that spread everywhere. Some dismissed him as reckless and irresponsible, but others, they couldn't help but nod along because setups, cover-ups, and industry schemes in the celebrity world weren't exactly unheard of anymore. Charleston knew exactly how to keep that tension alive and buzzing. He circled back again and again to one point that couldn't ever be ignored. David was still free and performing. He reminded people of the darkest claim floating online. They're saying he was dating a 13-year-old girl, and now she's dead. So you mean to tell me all this evidence exists, and police still haven't arrested him? For Charleston, the answer was simple and direct. They hadn't arrested him because he didn't do it. That was the hill he stood on proudly, no matter how much backlash it brought his way. Critics accused him of downplaying the death of a child, of excusing behavior that should never be excused under any circumstances. But Charleston thrived on outrage. He wasn't backing down for a second. While social media tore itself apart debating whether he was a truth teller or just trolling for clout, Charleston doubled down harder than ever before in front of his audience. He told audiences to think about all the cases they'd seen play out. Young black men dragged into courtrooms on whispers, rumors, maybes, and flimsy probablys. And yet here was David, supposedly surrounded by DNA, tattoos, lyrics, a Tesla with a body inside, and still no arrest anywhere? To Charleston, that wasn't coincidence, not at all. That was innocence, and he shouted it like it was gospel. And for millions watching online, those words hit like a shockwave nobody expected. People stopped, replayed, argued, and asked themselves over and over, what if Charleston wasn't completely wrong after all? That tiny possibility was enough to keep the story alive. But Charleston White's defense of David didn't just explode out of nowhere suddenly. To understand why his words went viral, why his outlandish claims stirred millions of heated comments, and why people even listened in the first place, you have to understand the man himself. Because Charleston White isn't just another commentator with a microphone. He's a whole walking controversy machine built to keep the world watching nonstop. He's a man powered entirely by controversy, a walking contradiction of crime, redemption, hypocrisy, and spectacle, all rolled into one unforgettable figure. Charleston White's life story isn't just messy or dramatic, it's explosive enough to fuel his entire reputation. Born in Texas in 1977, Charleston's world spun out of control fast and early. By just 14 years old, his life took a violent, irreversible turn he could never erase. Outside a Foot Locker, he was caught in a fatal altercation that left a man dead on the ground. Tried as an adult, convicted of murder, and locked up until age 21, Charleston walked out of prison already carrying a permanent stain on his name forever. For his critics, that's proof he has no moral ground to stand on whatsoever. But for Charleston, it became the foundation of his entire public persona. A past mistake turned into fuel for the loud, unapologetic mission he now lives by daily. After prison, Charleston tried hard to reinvent himself and rewrite the narrative. He even became a community activist, founding an organization called HOPY, Hypocrisy Over Politics, aimed at steering kids away from gangs, crime, and early prison sentences. For a moment, it looked like he might actually stay on the path of redemption, using his scars as warnings for the next generation coming up. But Charleston was never built for quiet reform or peaceful activism. His energy, his fire, his hunger to provoke outrage, it all pulled him right back into the spotlight, not as a saint, but as a lightning rod for drama. By the 2020s, he was infamous everywhere for his unfiltered honesty, calling out anyone who crossed him, rappers, politicians, and even entire communities. T.I., Boozy Badazz, countless others. Charleston didn't just critique them lightly, he went after their families, their parenting, and even their reputations without mercy. Every insult went viral instantly. Every feud brought him even more followers. And every time he did it, people asked the same burning question over and over again. Is Charleston White a truth teller exposing reality, or just a clout chaser willing to say absolutely anything for attention? Look at his feud with streamer Aiden Ross for proof. In 2023, Charleston pepper sprayed one of Ross's close associates live on camera. Chaos instantly erupted, legal threats flew everywhere, and his name was plastered across every platform. That single outrageous act summed him up perfectly. Volatile, unpredictable, and completely impossible for anyone to ignore. And it didn't stop there, not even close. At a comedy show, instead of calming hecklers or cracking jokes, Charleston pulled out stacks of cash and waved them in their faces, mocking them shamelessly as the crowd gasped in disbelief. To some, it was comedy gold. To others, it was proof he wasn't a reformed activist at all, just a showman completely addicted to outrage and attention. That's why people keep tuning into him day after day. Because Charleston doesn't just talk wild, he lives contradiction in real time. 1 minute, he's condemning gang culture and preaching accountability to kids. The very next, he's mocking victims, laughing at tragedies, and spitting on sacred lines that nobody else dares cross in public. In September 2025, he went viral once again after cursing out the family of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk following his sudden death, dismissing it coldly as just white-on-white crime while laughing hysterically. The outrage was immediate and brutal, but Charleston thrived on it, proving once again that he was completely addicted to scandal and shock value. That moment showed the true duality of Charleston White better than anything. Part social critic, part troll, and pure chaos rolled into one controversial figure. When Charleston speaks, people tune in for two reasons. Either they believe he's exposing hard truths nobody else dares to touch, or they're waiting for him to trip up, explode, and contradict himself publicly. Either way, his words travel fast, and that's why his voice carried so much weight when he aimed it at David's case. Charleston doesn't exist in a vacuum. He lives right in the very center of controversy. And this time, his target wasn't a rapper he was beefing with or a politician he despised on principle. It was the entire system itself, and his bold, explosive claim that David was innocent. By the time Charleston threw his weight behind that defense, his reputation was already stacked high with scandals, viral meltdowns, and endless explosive hot takes. He wasn't just stepping into the storm, he was the storm itself. His entry into David's case only added thunder and lightning to an already chaotic public mess. Back in early 2024, Charleston had already proven to the world he had zero respect for sacred ground or cultural boundaries. He mocked the tragic deaths of Chicago's King Von and Houston's Takeoff, laughing, clowning, and dismissing their legacies as just the natural end of reckless street life. Clips of his wild commentary spread like wildfire across platforms, cementing him as someone who truly didn't care about boundaries. That was the exact moment Charleston stopped being seen as a reformed activist and officially became a professional antagonist for the culture. Then came his ugly, headline-grabbing feud with Boozy Badazz. Charleston openly blasted Boozy's parenting, claiming his reckless choices were steering his kids straight into the same chaos and danger he once lived himself. It wasn't just an insult thrown online, it was a direct attack aimed at Boozy's family. And when Boozy fired back in anger, Charleston escalated immediately, hurling threats that blurred the line between jokes and actual real-world violence. To Charleston, it was just keeping it real and speaking his truth. But to his critics, it was pure harassment and reckless endangerment. Even law enforcement couldn't dodge Charleston's wrath or outrageous mouth. He mocked entire police departments, insulted police chiefs, and once even bragged publicly that he'd shoot any cop who tried him personally. The contradictions piled higher and higher with each live stream. Here was a man preaching against gang violence while simultaneously glorifying confrontation and armed defiance like a badge of honor. And yet, The madness, the contradictions, the chaos only made him bigger and more viral every single time. Every feud, every insult, every shocking statement